So today we've got Gaétan de Rassenfosse, who's going to tell us about his experience with creating this IPRoduct database. And I think I haven't seen the presentation, so I don't know for sure, but I think it'll be a combination of some interesting information about the data set itself and also some insights that perhaps are more general about the challenges of sharing data of this kind. So we're very thankful to Gaétan for doing this, and we'll do the usual thing. People can put questions in the chat, comments in the chat, but we'll also, I think, have some time at the end for a more general discussion. So Gaétan, you can take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Adam, for inviting me. And so indeed, I mean, you described the objective fairly well. Today's talk, it's a use case on best practices for sharing, producing IP data. Not that IPRoduct has implemented these best practices, but more that we are in search of the best practices we could implement to make sure the data is as valuable and for the research community. So before we start, many of you, in fact, have already an account on iProduct.io. If you don't, you are free to register on the website. I am the one validating the accounts, and I always say yes, but there needs to be a human in the loop, and so your account won't be validated before, before the end of the talk. And you can also follow us on Twitter. So the objective of the talk is we'll go over the IPRoduct database in brief, and let me spoil you the suspense, but IPRoduct is a contraction from IPR and products. So it's a database that links intellectual property rights and products. We'll then go over our biggest challenge in terms of data construction and data sharing. We'll then discuss how we can best facilitate data access and use, as well as, if we have more time, I'll put out some questions for discussion. But in any case, at any time, please share your thoughts, your best practices from your own experience, or maybe your frustration with this data or with other type of data. So it's really a discussion, right? So I'm really just putting here some material where I want your input, but please feel free to jump in at any time. All right, so let me go over the database in very brief. So we have a product here, the Logitech Marathon mouse, M705, and we want to know the patents that are protecting this product. And it turns out there are 3 patents, and we know it with certainty. And these are all patents by Logitech. And essentially, that's what the database offers, a database that links products to patents. And I see that Samuel Arnaud has joined. He's actually now the lead software, or the lead web developer behind the database. Okay, so that's what we want to report, right? The way we do it is by exploiting patent marking. And so here I've depicted a very simple example of patent marking. We have this watch. It's a Switch watch, Roamer. Not necessarily a fancy watch by Swiss standards, but nevertheless, here it's written on the back of the watch, Swiss patent, with a couple of numbers. And these are patent numbers. And that's what we call physical marking. So it's printing, patent numbers on the product. So since 2014, especially in the US, but to some extent in the UK as well, the legislator has allowed virtual patent marking. So instead of physically printing the patent number of the product, you are allowed to put the information online. And that's what we call a virtual patent marking web page. So here we have the VPM web page of Logitech with different patent lists issued at different period in time. And if we click on the most recent link, we actually have PDF documents that opens with all of the Logitech products that are protected by patent. and the corresponding patent numbers. And here it's a PDF document with 18 pages. So it's, it already contains a lot of data. So essentially, our objective is we want to structure identify, find this information online, extract it, and distribute it in a way that is easy to use. So you may have at this point lots of questions about why firms use VPM. So why firms want to put that information online. That's not the objective of today's talk, to go into details. If we have more time towards the end, we could probably discuss it. But if you want to know more, there is here a paper, and I guess you can click on the link on the version that you received by email. That explains the economic incentives for doing so. And here we have another paper with written with Kyle Iham, who was a postdoc at EPFL and who is now in Japan, on some legal consideration of VPM. And essentially here we are pushing for a standard for firms to adopt VPM in a certain manner, because of course for us that will greatly simplify your task, because you will see that there is no structured information by any means. So collecting the data is a challenge. So here is an extract of the database as we release it at the moment. So now it's just a sample database, but nevertheless, that's what it looks like. It's a CSV file where we have all the product number, all the product name, the patent number, and here we have our Logitech M705 mouse with the 3 corresponding patents, and we also enrich the information with additional we enrich the data with additional information such as the sector, here is consumer electronics, the country of headquarters, Switzerland, and the foundation year, turning 40, as well as the number of employees. The goal of this project is to offer a database that links products to patents. We want it to be regularly updated, in fact, almost continuously updated, not in real time, but as frequently as possible. And we want also to provide rich information on products and companies, because as much as we could just share the patent product data, it's not very useful if everyone then has to collect individually data on these individual products. What are the product prices? Are these products protected by trademarks, or you name it? So that's a data that we believe these data are key to the successful adoption of the overall iProduct data. Okay, so that was very briefly what the data look like and our objectives. So now let me talk about the biggest challenges that we face and the biggest barrier here. So economists, and many of us in the room are economists, they know very well the recipe for producing data or knowledge. It's characterized by high, sometimes high, but certainly fixed production costs. So you produce it once and for all, and low marginal cost of distribution or reproduction. So once you have the data, you can send it by email or post it online, at zero cost, essentially. It's a non-rival good and a non-excludable good, in the sense that the fact that one person used the data doesn't preclude others from using the same data. And it's also very difficult to exclude people from using the data once it's out there. And so, as I mentioned, economists know how to produce such data. And initially, we have public funders or philanthropists covering the cost of data production, right? So that's the cost of the researcher spending, a month, 2 months, a year, 2 years producing the data. Here, the incentives of producing such data are even stronger if the funders strongly encourage data sharing or even require it. And that's more and more the case, right? So here on this front, I think, overall the picture looks good. The researcher invests their time in producing the data with the hope of publishing papers that exploit this data and come up with novel findings. And again, here, the incentives are even stronger if the data as such can attract citations. And now more and more data set can be cited. It's more and more recognized as a scientific contribution. So again, here, the incentives are pretty good. Finally, in terms of the distribution, so sharing the there is indeed a low marginal cost or a low cost of reproduction or sharing. And think here of Dataverses. And we had a very nice discussion about the Harvard Dataverses and Zenodo 2 weeks ago. They have been tremendously useful to drive down the distribution cost to essentially zero, right? And finally, proper documentation limits customer support requests. And we discussed that. Matt was mentioning of, well, if only. All right. So indeed, but that's the idea. So we want the data to be as clearly explained as possible, because we don't want to be buried with customer requests. I mean, with requests for support, because that's essentially that's not our job. And so in that model, the incentives and the best way of sharing the data are actually pretty well understood. Unfortunately, IPRoduct doesn't really fit that model, and that's where the biggest barrier for me lies at the moment. So remember what I mentioned, IPRoduct links products to patents. Okay, there is a fixed cost of producing it, but in fact, we want to continuously update it, and the material is continuously changing. So the cost is not fixed. It's not once and for all, it's a running investment if you want. And finally, we want to provide rich information on products and data, which further adds to the cost. And so let me be a bit more clear here on what I mean by non-fixed costs. Let's go back to the original Logitech virtual patent marking web pages. We have 3 different versions, so 4 different versions, right? So every month or every week or every 6 months, we need to revisit these pages potentially to collect the new data. So new documents pop up regularly at known places. So here we just need to go and visit the logitech.com webpage, or sometimes unknown places. New firms produce VPM web pages, or the URL change, right? And so we cannot simply just go and download all of the patent data and then start disambiguating it. Here we need to keep searching the web for new data or different data. In addition to that, there is no standard data structure across documents. So the Logitech document will be different from the Philips document, and there is even a changing data structure within documents. So Logitech might have an Excel file, back in 2015, then moving to a Word document, then moving to a PDF. Might produce information under a table, or then simply under full text. So essentially, it's very hard to automate the process. And in addition, there is, as I mentioned, a lot of potential for data augmentation. I'll give you an example with product information. So the project essentially grows bigger with time. That means that iProduct is an open-ended project, which doesn't fit, the fixed cost of production, low marginal cost of reproduction that I was mentioning. So now there is a question by Sam on, are there related efforts to extract physical patent marking plus UPC codes plus infer product type from photos? Not that I am aware of, and that's something we want to do and we're partly doing in the platform. And something it's a direction in which we want to go, because that's going to be tremendously useful. Because indeed we can essentially, right, let's go back to some of the data we offer. That's a product. That's what a product will look like in our data, the Logitech M535 mouse. But if you have that piece of information, there is very little you can do. I mean, you can already answer some interesting economic or management questions, but it's going to be more interesting if you have the unique product code of that item. And so we want to enrich the data in this direction. And again, if you have ideas for how we can automate that, they're more than welcome. Okay, so iProduct is an open-ended project, which then brings our main challenge. Okay, and before that, there is a question by Adam on, do we know anything about the relative prevalence of VPM and physical marking? So very little information about physical marking. I think there is a study by Neil Sukatme from George Washington University, where he went over drugstores, if I remember well, and just looked at how many products were patented. I mean, how many products had a physical marking, and the number were now below 10%. But you know, don't quote me on this. For virtual marking, and that's an estimate we present in the NBR paper, roughly 25% of so what we did, so we took a random sample of USPTO assignees. We checked online, I mean, we checked for their webpage, and 25% of them, 10 to 15% of them had a VPM webpage. However, when we know that not all the firms commercialize products, if we estimate that roughly 50% of patentees actually have, you know, products to commercialize, that they commercialize, that would suggest that roughly 25% of the relevant population would use VPM. So that's actually non-negligible, right? And so that's thousands of patents, essentially. So I think this is a number big enough to warrant further investment in this data. So as I was mentioning, our challenge here is how can we maximize production and diffusion at the same time? So we cannot rely indefinitely on external funding. External funding dries out at some stage. So we need to find ways of financing the data organically. You know, it's a fairly complex data production process, while at the same time ensuring wide diffusion. So the solution we come up with is to crowdsource some of our data effort, of course, with incentives. And so here, your thoughts on how we can optimize, you know, this crowdsourcing or this, or we can address this maximization challenge would be more than welcome. And so before I answer the question, let me go over the 3 phases that we are considering. So now the data is, I mean, the platform, the IPRoduct platform is live. It's online. You can already register. You can already contribute. The data download is not yet available. So now we're just trying to fix bugs, essentially, and enrich the functionalities. Starting in June, or I mean, you know, second semester of the year until December 2021, but maybe later, we think of IPRoduct as a club good. In other words, only people who belong to the club can access, meaning download the data. And here, belonging to the club means contributing to the data. And I will show you the various ways we can contribute. So in other words, the only way you can contribute, you can access the data is by having credits. And the only way to get credits at this stage is by, you know, earning them by helping on some specific data tasks. So here we believe it's a nice way to initially to enrich the data and get, you know, better and more data, while at the same time allowing people to already download them, especially if they have contributed. In the second phase, we are thinking of some differentiated pricing, and that's starting in January 2022. With an option to buy the data at a reduced price for university researcher. We don't know how much, you know, and full price for others. In fact, there is a big, you know, demand from companies to access this data. And so our objective, ultimately, that's stage number 3, is full subsidization of private firms for, you know, for the public use of the data for university researchers and nonprofits. So of course, here it's a fine line. You know, I mean, money is our hard constraint. So I need to be able to pay the salary of essentially the web developer, right? And so if we just give away the money, I mean, give away just data all at once, well, then the project essentially dies. So that's the tension here we're facing. And so maybe we will adopt the club good approach for a longer period. Maybe while doing so, we'll get a couple of firms willing to buy the data, and that would be enough for us to cover our costs. Maybe we'll have some generous donor who will finance us for 3 years, and that would be enough to, you know, and then we can just share the data. So lots of things can happen, but if we don't get external funding, that's how we see it working in the coming months. And here, your thoughts are more than welcome. And if you have ideas, I'll let you, formulate your thoughts. And meanwhile, I will answer or I'll take the question of Alex. Have you noticed if VPM includes patents that are licensed but not owned by the firm producing the products? Yes, we do. So sometimes, as part of licensing agreement, firm has, manufacturing firms has to mention products that are being licensed. So there is actually a marking requirements in lots of licensing contracts. So we do catch these data, and there is a flag in the IPRoduct database whether these patents are licensed. We do observe a lot of patents that are being transferred as well. So assume we take the page of Logitech, transferred meaning sold from one party to another. So let's go back to the page of Logitech. We have all of the patents that Logitech claims as being their own. And we know the original assignee, right? Maybe that assignee was a university, or maybe that assignee was another company. And so that's another way we could study the sales of patents. So one question on the cost on an annual basis. So at a minimum, it's 100,000 Swiss francs. So it's roughly $100,000. That's really the bare minimum with no tax from a university and nothing. And if we add ultimately a data editor or something, would be like 200,000. But the bare minimum would be 100,000, which is okay. It's 20 firms buying in at 5,000 each, or 5 firms at 20,000. So I think it's a reasonable objective. Have you approached any trade association for both funding and evangelizing of this as a best practice? Not yet, but that's definitely on my list. It's kind of a chicken and egg problem, because of course we cannot advertise the data too much while it's still in infancy. So for now, the data. So once we were approached by a firm and to say, oh, for me, it's only relevant if you have hundreds of thousands of products. Otherwise, if you have just 30, 50,000 products, that's not very interesting for me. So now we are in this critical phase. Matt on underscoring the point about dataset sustainability. Indeed, public funders pay maintenance. Researchers are very happy to be engaged in data production, but maintaining it's not our job, and there is essentially zero return, for doing that. So it's an issue.
Well, actually, I would be happy to maintain it, but I have to pay for it out of my own pocket. Like, nobody wants to fund maintenance. Like, grant agencies are like, ooh, new data set, love it. You want how much per year to kind of keep it going? That's not very exciting. So I think your approach is clever because it's a real problem. Yeah, definitely.
Just to iterate as well, the lens.org for 20 years, for the first 10 years, we paid it from Richard royalties to sustain it, basically. And then later we started adding more and more external funding and support. So it is definitely an issue, maintaining and improving a database for the community, especially if it is public good, as you mentioned before, where you want to maintain it non-exclusive access as well as available non-rivals.
Yeah, I wish I can finance it out of my licensing money, which I don't. But indeed, we need to start somewhere. So there is here a question by Dolores. Dolores, maybe you want to clarify your question or your point? If you can talk, that is.
Yeah, no, I can. I was just I was just clicking around. And hi, Gaétan. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So I was thinking there's other open-ended projects, right? Where we are not just satisfied with having a data set and saying, okay, this is on time point X, and this is all we're gonna give to you. So I was actually really happy to get the email to listen in and share thoughts on this, right? But my point in the question was, if you've done any kind of soft PR for this on platforms that attract industry eyeballs, right? Not so much academia, but industry, because many of these also have or share your problem as well, that the data sets are a little bit in the infancy. So there's only so much that you can offer at this point. But on the other hand, it's a good project, and right, kind of sharing the news of it and getting people used to seeing you around was kind of my question, right? I think we aim for a lot of kind of conferences, mostly academia. Some are mixed, but maybe we are not present enough on some forums that are more industry oriented. And I'm not sure if that's the way to go, but that was one of our discussions in our group, other than all the things that you've actually said. So we're pretty similar in our thinking on how to approach this.
No, I agree, and that's a good point. I haven't done too much PR apart from, you know, the circle of scholars interested in IP. But indeed, and Laura's points on the NASA, you know, who might be, you know, funders for this project. Indeed, so there are our trade associations from other mentioned. So indeed, there are options, and there are other ways of being funded. So far, I haven't thought of it, in fact, to be honest. And it's something that potentially could work, indeed. So that would be a very nice option. So now on Tanya's question about linking to sharing data on just products, no, I mean, there are actually product databases that exist. It's very expensive. But this is not the objective of iProduct. iProduct really, the objective is to connect IPR data, patent and trademark and design to product and enrich the product data we have as much as we can. And what fraction of products do not link to patents? Well, the majority of products don't link to patents, right? But within firms that do patent, most of the, I mean, what we find in the data, it's most of the products are actually related, linked to some patent, except in low technologies, or, you know, a firm producing, say, iPhone cases. So they might take some design patents for some of their accessories, but the majority of the accessories will not be patented. I don't know if that answers your questions. But... All right, so that's essentially the solution we're trying to we're pushing forward with. So now on the various ways in which you can contribute. So far there are 5 ways. So by contributing here, we also mean, so that's not only a need we have in terms of, you know, enriching the data, but it's also a way for the user to get credits. So the first task is to classify the pages. So essentially we have been crawling the web and collecting millions of web pages. And the vast majority of these web pages are not VPM web pages. They might contain patent numbers or phone numbers or things that look like patent numbers. They might, you know, have the word products or have the word patents in them. So they might be good candidates. They might be from firms that actually own patents. But nevertheless, that still leaves us with millions of pages. And so we have been developing classifiers to identify these VPM web pages. But even if we have highly accurate classifiers, you know, say a 0.1% mistake, you know, over 1 million pages still leaves, or even 500 million pages, still leaves lots of junk in the data. So here we need people to train, well, to validate the results of the classifier and to train them. So that's essentially clicking yes, no, and classifying the pages. Sharing web documents is another option. So maybe by browsing the web, you might find VPM web pages and you can just upload the link. And of course, then that will be fed into the classifier where The crawl will just validate whether the page is indeed a correct VPN page. Sending pictures is another one. And here we try to catch the physical marking. So that's these three features are already live. So if you come up with a physically marked product, here a Microsoft mouse, you can just upload it. Ideally, I would like to have a mobile phone app where you can just take a picture and then send it directly to the platform. But this is too fancy for now. And finally, two ways of contributing to additional ways, which are enriching products data and enriching companies. So let me zoom in into these two different categories, and maybe you'll have ideas on additional fields that we could have. So this is the product enrichment data sheets, which is not yet live. So Samuel is actually working hard on it, and we'd like to release it in coming days or weeks. So essentially, that's the data we extract. That's the only data, in fact, we extract directly from the web page. At the time of imputation, it's kind of cleaned in a way. At the time of encoding in the databases, we clean it in certain ways. Is it a physical product or is it a software? Or sometimes we have a methods or a technology, in which case, that's an information we capture. Category here, it's the Harmonized Community Description and Coding System, the HS category, which essentially allocates products into a fine-grained level of categories. That's going to be very important for people studying, I don't know, trade, for instance, where HS data is very useful. Very often used in international trades. Here we have external, unique product identifiers, UPC and EAN, as well as ASIN. So ASIN is for Amazon. And so as soon as you can connect this product to Amazon, then you can have lots of very nice information about these products. We have, or we want to have information on the release date, as well as an indication of the price. And finally, data on trademarks. So this is it's time-consuming data enrichment, right? So for users who are willing to enrich this data, it will bring a lot of credits. Of course, we don't know how many credits to give. So far, we give 1 credit per piece of information, but we don't know what's 1 credit mean. So we need to think of a nice way of valuing properly the various contributions, and it's kind of tricky.
Gaétan, can I ask a question about this?
Of course.
Form? So it seems like for used by economists, the product producer, maybe the company involved, might be a very important piece of data. And I recognize that the patent has that information, except that there's the licensing issue, et cetera, and it strikes me that it's useful to collect the name of the company separately and not rely only on the patent ownership information. And as far as I can tell from this form, you don't have that information on the form.
That's an excellent point, Bronwyn, because it leads to my next slide, which is the firm datasheet.
Ah, fine, good.
So indeed, it's a key information, and we have it from the patent assignee. But in fact, we have it even better from the web domain.
Yeah.
So here it's Watco Manufacturing Industries, which we try to systematically link to LinkedIn. So here it's an example where the information is missing, and we try to allocate it to different sectors, and these are the LinkedIn sectors. But again, here we want to enrich in various ways. So the number of employees, because that's an information lots of researchers will want to have. The age or the foundation year of the company, a headquarter, social network information, LinkedIn, Facebook could be useful. For us, it's more of a way to uniquely identify companies easily, as well as the ISIC, the industrial classification of the firm. So do you see any other information that you may want in the future, either on the firm or on the product that you think would be relevant?
Yeah, that looks good.
So, and then we have a question by Kristen. if a firm has variation in its name, is it standardized? So the way we standardize it is by using the LinkedIn name. And so normally that's fine. And we don't have data coming from different places. They all come from the company website. So we don't really have variations here. What we have, of course, is this big conglomerate where you have the Philips healthcare division that has a website on its own, a LinkedIn page on its own. Then there is the Philips electronic division, or sometimes over time firms get acquired, merge, go bankrupt. So here we don't do anything at this stage about disambiguating firms or tracking them and their evolution over time. This is just too complex for now at this stage. So now it's kind of a panel, a cross-section, if you want, or a series of cross-section. And there is a nice idea of open corporates and their reconciliation endpoints, which we will definitely look into, in fact. Yeah, ComputeStat, it's unfortunately only an other company data set. The issue is we want open data as much as we can. ComputeStat is only for listed company and you need to pay for it. And other company data set, again, you might need to install the local version every 6 months, or and that's one of the reasons why you will see later we don't use PatStat. So we want to offer unique links to patents, but we'll not link to PatStat because every 6 months we'll need to install and use and pay for the new PatStat database. And as much as I like PatStat, here it just doesn't work. So we really need open data, and so the open corporates, it's something we'll actually look into. Thanks a lot, Sam.
It strikes me that things like name standardization and matching to other data sets is really outside the scope of your project at this point. I mean, I would not go too wide.
No, exactly.
You leave that to the individual researcher, and certainly the patent number PatStat match is pretty straightforward. For an individual researcher using whatever vintage
exactly
PatStat. Yeah.
Well, exactly.
I know. I agree with the strategy, I would say.
So we can provide a couple of lines of codes, to match to PatStat. That's fine. We'll not offer the link ourselves. And as for leaving the harmonization or the connection, connecting, say, firm data to individual researchers, in fact, we'd like to avoid that as much as we can, because that's a duplication of work. And so that's why ideally someone does it on its own, and then we integrate it into the data, and then we can share it with everyone. That's kind of the idea we have here with these forms. It might not be the most flexible approach, but really if someone does something on its own, like for instance, linking with trademark data. So now there have been two scholars interested in linking product name with trademark data. And at this stage, my deal with them is, yes, I give them to you, but in exchange, give me the trademark, the link, and then I will feed it into the data for everyone to use. Maybe with a 6 months embargo, or maybe with a 1 year embargo, or maybe with a restriction to cite your specific work if the person decides to also export the trademark data. But I guess, that's the most efficient way in a sense. And so the LOD dataset, the linked open data dataset by the EPO is something we could use, but I realized the Google DocDB is more efficient and it's easier. But we can discuss that, Dolores, later on, because of course I know you are very heavily involved in here. So Adam, maybe you want to say something about open corporates.
Well, I don't know much more than I put in that little thing in the chat. I just know that Sloan is big on open corporate. So if we had a particular project that we wanted to do that would connect patent data to the open corporates effort, that's something they might well be willing to support.
Thanks. There is, and Matt has a question on downloading DocDB from Google Patents. but it would have been cheaper to buy PatStat. I'm actually not sure why you say that, Matt, because DocDB is essentially free. I mean, on Google BigQuery.
Right, but downloading from Google is not free. I mean, you have to pay transport.
But PatStat is 500 euros. I mean, 1,000 euros per year. You know.
Okay. Maybe we wrote a bad query. We'll see. Okay. We got a very big bill from Google for processing Google patents. Maybe we did it the wrong way. That's probably.
Oh well, if you download the full text, okay, that's different. No.
Oh yeah, this is full text. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Okay.
It was extraordinarily. I don't want to say how much money we spent. It was painful.
Okay.
Anyway, I'll take it offline.
All right. So now some more thoughts about user contributions. Managing. So as much as I very like the idea of having, you know, this club good initially, and then opening it up with private entities funding, you know, public research, I mean, public use, and having a community of users contributing and improving the data. Still, managing the user community is costly, essentially validating the entries. So for now, we think of 3 levels of trusted users. Newcomer, essentially, as soon as you register, you are a newcomer, and contributions need to be validated by an admin. At this stage, the admin is me. We then have trusted users, and so it's not yet implemented, but that's the direction in which we're going. When enough contributions have been validated, well, the user become a trusted user, and then we don't even look at his contribution anymore. They are automatically accepted. And then we have the read-only user. So when too many contributions have been rejected, well, all you can do would be, you know, to log in on the website and essentially, you know, explore the data, but not contribute to enriching them. So as I mentioned so far, we have 100 plus registered users, but only a handful have contributed. So we have some motivated persons who did enrich the data to some extent, but of course now the pipeline is full of leaks, you know. So now, if you do contribute in one area of the software, it doesn't feed necessarily in the other pieces of the software. So now it doesn't work very well yet. So and the data are not yet available for download. So maybe we'll have more contributions when people will be actually able to download the data, or maybe the user friendliness is not. I mean, the interface is not friendly enough, or maybe we should implement some elements of gamification, like a scoreboard of the, you know, the most prolific contributors or something, or maybe we should offer gifts or incentives. Likewise, what is the best? How to make the reward structure attractive for contributors. You know, if you earn 1 credit per contribution and you need 30,000 credits, it's not very attractive. So how can we, you know, fine tune essentially the user contribution incentive scheme? So Sam, you mentioned something that I don't really understand. Can you on CDN?
Oh, just a passing comment. If bandwidth costs are actually an issue for some of these large data sets, content delivery networks that spend a lot of their time working with encrypted data or movies, and you know, the video streamers, they often have research arms, and that might be an interesting conversation to have.
Okay.
If we ever have a longer conversation with people like BigQuery, who have some data sets that they make free for everyone, we could also bring in some of the CDNs for solving it at the technical level.
There is also a comment by Tanya on sharing data along the line of what I just told you about the trademark data. And yes, please, by any means. So if you essentially, oops, sorry, I'm going too far. I wanted to go back. Essentially, if you want, we can just share some piece of data. So I mean, all of the firm name, and then you fill in this type of information. So we give you the data in bulk, you know. and then we feed it back into the database. And so for now, to me, it's a different approach than the user contribution through the platform. You can contribute outside of the platform, where we give you the data in exchange of you enrich it and then we feed it. So that's definitely something that I'm very keen. So I think the trademark would be fairly well covered, especially US trademarks. But indeed, like price data, or linking to UPC codes, that's very, very expensive in a sense for contributors. So we would be very happy if someone wants to just jump and share for any type of data mentioned here, or maybe that we did not mention. Okay, so now we're really, we will be thinking, especially in June, July, when the data will be available for download, on how we can maximize user contributions. And I will get back to that point towards the end of the talk. All right, so some more on how we can facilitate data access and use by the community. So we have developed an intuitive export module. So now if you have an account on IPRoduct, you can just go and log in and at least search for data that you want to export. But otherwise, here is a very simple illustration of how it works. Essentially, it's a form with various fields to filter the data as much as you can. So here we search all of the web documents that contains the term mouse. We have 12 companies covering 194 US patents. Of course, these are just documents that mention mouse. So it could be the electronic mouse by Logitech, or it could be a website from a life science company that has developed a tool or a sequencing for mouse, whatever. But here we have spent Samuel has spent a great amount of time in developing a nice export function, because as the data are costly, we want to make sure that the user extract really what they need, and so you can filter by country, by years, maybe if you want small firms or young firms, or by industry. So here, that's something on which we'll be working on more and more. But indeed, we want to be efficient in how we deliver the data to people. Further, in terms of making life easier for the user, at some point we will be creating a FAQ or forum, and that's actually inspired by a comment that Bronwyn made two weeks ago on the PatStat forum, which indeed is very useful. And so here at some stage we will need to implement a forum. So now we're just too young. There are just not enough volume, but that's something we'll put in place now, maybe a year from now. I'm struggling with the idea of creating a user guide, because who reads them really? I mean, it takes time to write and very few people read them. But that's something we could do. A visual user guide, indeed. So, it's more modern version. Thank you, Dolores, of user guides.
Just to comment on user guides, since I use online, I use Words all the time online, right? Which is a CompuStat or company data. The most useful feature of a user guide is a detailed description for each variable of exactly how it's constructed. The rest of it, you're not clear. You need anything other than sample frame. I mean, information on the sample frame. In other words, you can structure a user guide so it doesn't have a lot of bump in it, but it has what people need. As I say, the key thing is it's obvious to the creator what the variable contains, but it's not obvious to the user. And frequently there are lists of codes that are not easily accessible, et cetera, in the variable description. So I would say, you could redesign the idea of a user guide in that direction.
No, that's a fair point. Indeed, there is some data which we can easily produce, some information which we can easily produce, and indeed, the data structure and the data format, which it's easy for us and it's nevertheless very useful. So okay, leaning more towards the user guide in maybe a year from now. Any other questions or comments or thoughts? Oh, sorry, I didn't finish. So in terms of connectivity, and that's here about, for now we see three main elements of connectivity, and I mean, we have firms as well, but for now we don't really have a firm identifier that we can connect to. So we have patents, and here we're thinking of the DocDB compatible format, which we can easily get from Google BigQuery, and that would be US 7650331B1, which we can very easily connect to PatStat indeed. So we don't need ourselves to report the PatStat application ID or the patents view ID, because as soon as you have this information, you know, that's all you have. And I guess Dolores, correct me if I'm wrong, but then we can easily connect as well with the linked open data if we have the DocDB format. Okay, I see you're agreeing. In terms of products, so we will move to, I mean, we will report ASIN, UPCs, and EAN. So that's already, you know, 3 different product codes. Not sure whether it will be useful to people, but for us, it's actually useful to discipline ourselves to make sure that we have really individual products, because what is written on a web page is just an item, or I mean, it's a product, but we want to make sure it corresponds to a product you can buy. You can actually buy. And so that's why for us, the ASIN or UPC or EAN code would be a guarantee that it's indeed something you can buy. And finally, trademarks data will simply have in, you know, to start with the US trademark numbers. So now on Nicolas' question, that's a very interesting question. So the export function currently says that you need 6,000 credits. In fact, I thought it was more, but okay. Would be needed to download the entire data set. Do you have an estimate of how many hours of labor it would take to earn that many credits? Let me ask you a different question. How many, and so we're talking about, I think 30,000 patents for 80,000 products. Exactly, Osmat. So that 30,000, 40,000 patents for, I don't know, 80,000 products or something. So how much hours of work would you be willing to put in to get this data? So just maybe you can just write in the chat. That's going to be terribly helpful for us to get a scale for how we should rewards and give away credits. So in other words, how many hours of work would you be willing to put in yourself or some RAs, right? To get the entire patent product data. Just write your number in the chat box. Oh, Adam is extremely motivated. So you can keep coming with your own estimates. This will be very, very helpful for us, right? Okay, RA time, of course. And indeed, 40 hours is a week time, essentially 8 hours a week for 5 days. A week time to get the entire data, it's actually a pretty good deal. And especially if you can put RAs on it. And indeed the price, 20K, for just the product data. Well, so run win time, which is very expensive, will be 20 hours, and math would be 100 plus. So depend how long the access continues over time. So that's a very good point, Sam. And indeed, that's something on which we have been working, because we realize that as you start your research project, you extract accepted data. Meanwhile, the data keep improving. What will happen is we'll get access to the, I mean, you have access to the data you have extracted, but in fact, we'll be able to rerun the query, and we will be able, and actually we are already able to tell you how many changes there has been in your query since you downloaded them, and how many more credits you will need to update the data. That would be, you know, a fraction of the overall credits. So, you know, we have, you know, this long-term perspective in mind.
And then can you delegate credit to other groups? If you become very motivated and you build up a lot of credit, can you identify a network of friendly research groups or all? Yeah.
We're actually thinking, it's in fact in our list of specification that Samuel will implement in the coming weeks, month, I don't know. You can actually give credits. And here, the reason we did it, it's maybe, you know, a postdoc or a professor has a couple of, or an army of RAs. All these RAs collect credits, which they can then give to the professor so that he can download the data. So indeed, you can give credits. Or maybe someone can buy credits. Maybe you can buy 10,000 credits and then give it to whoever.
That strikes me that, I mean, what you're suggesting, I mean, the professor and the RAs really means that you need group credits because you want the RAs to have access to the data. I mean, in a future life.
No, exactly.
Yeah, you don't want them have just working for the professor so he can get the data. Or she.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you might think of it as a group model in some cases.
Indeed, you know. So that would be possible, in fact.
Yeah.
And on Osmat's point, I see that you will end up more busy with managing rather than perfecting the database. Not really, because we need to set up the system. So bottom line, if we have funders giving us money, we don't need all this. You know, we can just keep going. Yeah. But now we work under the assumption that we will not have the energy to, you know, to hunt for money. You know, have been hunting for money for the past 4 years on that project. So now it's time, you know, we move on, assuming we don't get money. And so we just want to put the system in place such that it's self-sustained, essentially. So now we're thinking, indeed, now we spend some time on fine-tuning, you know, this credit delegation, you know, and the user, the gamification. So that will take some development time, that's for sure. But once it's in place, you know, the hope is the data will enrich itself fairly frequently. And remember, that's because the material we work with, these web pages, they keep changing all the time, and it's difficult to automate. So that's why we realized we actually need human inputs. And the best way to get human inputs, to me, would be you know, these user contributions. Essentially, maybe later on we can, I mean, let's see, but in any case, there is some automation we can do, and we do it with the classifiers, for instance, and some others that still we will need human intervention. So I think the time is off. So I want to just leave a couple of questions on the table that we have. The term of use for using the data, what should they be? Can we learn from other participative efforts like Wikipedia? What price point and reward structure? So I've seen all of your comments, I will go to them. Forget question 4. And then I have been tempted to share the product patent data table, but I'm worried that it will kill the long-term survival of the project. So maybe I can share them for free with the community with a 1-year lag, or for, you know, with specific restrictions. But so that's something we're considering as well. So we're officially over time, but any question or comments you may have are more than welcome, of course.
I think we have another 10 minutes to wrap up.
Very good.
Terms of use, you should look at the Creative Commons licenses because you actually want one that prevents redistribution at this point, you know, judging from the model. On the other hand, you also want attribution, you know, and so forth. So I think there are various versions of the Creative Commons licenses that, you know, one of which will be suitable for what you want to do. And in particular, you know, the profit, nonprofit distinction. I sort of agree with you on 5. You know, at least you want to delay until you really have the whole thing set up with the, you know, the club model. And so
I mean, I think a lot depends on whether there really is a commercial use or sort of corporate strategy. They're going to want current data. So if it turns out there really is a demand for that, to sell it to them and then give it to people like me, if you gave it to me a year old, I don't care if it's a year old, I'm doing research. So I think if there really is a corporate demand, you could do it by selling current data and giving away old data. But but
I
I
agree.
think it's unclear whether that's going to work.
I completely agree with that, and that is always a good model. I mean, it segments the market very well.
But our experience with the corporate engagement is that your product need to have certain standard, and in order to attract and maintain corporate use or for commercial purposes to license, that means you have to have a certain level of validation and accuracy in the data. So if it is at its infancy yet, it's a harder game to sell to corporate such data.
Yeah, I feel that the data is not yet ready to be sold. In fact, we've been approached by foundations. One example is the Novo Nordisk Foundation. They wanted to track how much of their scientific publications or funded science ended up in commercial products. And so here, that's something that we're happy to have the data. It doesn't need to be perfect, you know, but are willing to pay for it. So this is a model that we can work with at the moment. But as Matt, I very much agree. As soon as firms start buying regularly the data needs to be a much, much higher level of quality than it is now.
Exactly. And so I welcome actually, Gaétan, the further discussion with regarding the use of open corporates and in collaboration with the Lens. So I was a bit surprised that you did not, let's say, think about linking to the Lens, especially in terms of patents. And because we do have the open platform that's available to everyone, so that would be a way for you to maximize that opportunity and not pay any single money for it.
Okay, yeah, so now we just reported the DocDB, and I assumed you could easily link from DocDB to the Lens. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the case. But indeed, we could report the Lens ID as well, and that's fine. Yeah. I think that's easy enough, and I think that could be useful. So I agree. I will look into that. Okay. Thanks.
As to get that last question, that seems like a great thing to continuously survey some of your clients about. Our research, which publishes open access citation data, they started with a sort of they imagined a long lead time, like releasing things once a year, and they talked about it. That was the thing everyone always wanted to talk to them about, and so they just asked everyone. And they had this bimodal distribution where almost all the researchers couldn't really afford a large fund and didn't care if things were a few months old, and all the companies needed something they really wanted the last month. And so it happened that it fell out nicely.
Yeah, and you know, one more advantage of this approach is then we can get a DOI. I can just put the data on any dataverse, and then for replicating and everything, it makes things much easier. Because now people will have to be citing this data as IPRoduct data, just a bit like you are citing CompuStat. But if we put it on a public repository, then you can cite the actual version you've been using. So that's another benefit I see. So let's see.
On question 4, doesn't it, I'm not sure how difficult this is, but doesn't it make sense to put the web link in the in that product page?
Yeah, okay, so let me rephrase question 4. By sharing the actual VPM page, I'm here thinking about like the actual page that we've extracted from the company. And the reason is there are lots of computer science students who may develop fancy extraction algorithms that we can just incorporate into our platform. So surely we can send the link, we can share the link.
Yeah, the trouble is the link isn't
changes.
permanent.
Exactly, they change actually very often.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. Yeah, it just seems like storing the actual VPN pages. Well, that's just a whole another order of magnitude. It's like Matt's DocDB text.
Oh no, we do it. We store them. You know, we store them because We need to extract the information from them. If we notice mistakes, we need to go back to the original document. In fact, we save them in 3 versions. We save them in the rich HTML, in a clean version, and in PDF, just in case.
Yeah.
But that's okay. You know, storing is cheap if we do it internally, in a sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that, you know, if you can.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, the one problem with sharing is now everybody's going to be able to do a check on your data accuracy.
I'm happy for them to do that and report mistakes. You know, that's yeah.
So that's one benefit.
You can rely on public web archives for that. There are people whose only mission is to provide that kind of access and figure out and handle the very rare occasional takedown request.
We went into that, but it's very slow, you know, to get access to the documents. To extract the archive, it's kind of slow.
Right, you might not want to use that for daily.
No, exactly.
Daily use.
But indeed, in longer term, that's something we could think of as well. Thanks.
Any other thoughts or comments? Gaétan, this was really interesting. Thank you. I think it's great to have concrete examples of the issues that people are going through and for us all to be able to think about it. So 2 weeks from today, we're going to kind of do the same thing with a different data set. Matt is going to talk about his science linkages data set, and we'll have the same idea. Matt, you want to say anything by way of your own pitch?
Oh, is it 2 weeks from now? I thought it was next week. That's great. More time.
Wait, Laura, when is it? I thought it was 2 weeks.
Yes, it is 2 weeks. You're right. You're right. Thank you. I'm so
Okay.
organized, you can tell. Yeah, so one thing I'll say is I promise I know I've done like 3 talks about how we built the data set, and I will not talk about that. I know you're all sick and tired of hearing about our file-based hash table. I will not bore you with that. It will just be about, it's going to be about, I'm going to call dilemmas in data sharing. So basically a bunch of forking paths about, you know, do I share, do I harvest, and then where do I share, how do I share, do we register, all that kind of thing. So hopefully you can avoid some of the pain I went through.
Great. Okay, well, thank you all, and thanks Gaétan in particular. And those of you who are interested, see you in 2 weeks.